Hi guys, it's Lucy. Today I wanted to talk about this new book that I just read. It's called The Overstory, written by Richard Powers. And this has been on my list for a long time. I'm going to give it to you guys in two parts. So the first part, I'll talk about the book and the author. And in the second part, I wanted to just go over very briefly a couple of other books that are highly related to this book that's part of the Overstory that I have in my head. So, superficial note first, this is a different cover than the one that I've seen that we have in North America. I picked this up in Ireland, and it's part of a Vintage Earth series that Penguin did. So, if you guys have the chance to find a copy of this one, I would recommend it because apparently the Vintage Earth editions are printed on low carbon paper and the covers are fully recyclable, which I don't know for sure would apply to the other North American edition as well. But this one is fully green, so that's another pro. So this book first came on my radar because it won the Pulitzer Prize, and more so when I was flipping through it in the bookstore, even the prologue on the first page, the first two pages drew me in immediately. I'll just quote two sentences on the very first page. So the first sentence, the tree is saying things in words before words. And the second sentence that I underlined a paragraph or two later, a thing can travel everywhere just by holding still. There are a lot of really well-written phrases and sentences that are very lyrical and meaningful throughout the book. I would really like to quote a couple of phrases and sentences just to illustrate how amazingly written this book really is. There are a lot of creative and novel word combinations that I really admire and speak to me. So, for example, she leaves the truck stop in love with aimless humanity. And this next one, the sky does amazing things. It bruises a little in the freedom of the west, while to the east it spills open like a pomegranate. And this one, no strangeness stranger than the strangeness of living things, which is a very tongue-twisting way of saying how weird life really is. And this one, it's describing a smell, a shot of spiritual butterscotch, a sprig of pineapple incense. It smells like nothing but itself, pungent and sublime. And this is describing the scent of a pine tree, the trunk of a pine tree. And here, a sense of injustice larger than her whole life. And this one, she's young and guileless, stripped of fear, with a calling stronger than any medieval nuns. That is a killer combo, by the way. And this one, talking about a car ride, 5 hours west. They know each other as well as any two people can know each other, short of catastrophe. And I really found this one funny. Nevada is wide and bleak enough to mock all human politics. And I have driven through parts of Nevada as well, and I would totally agree. And here, the wrong people have all the rights. And amused by the folly of all human aspiration, she laughs, and that's all he needs to believe. And the last one that I marked, the whole idea is a holy nightmare, a death dance of justice. So these are all partial sentences and phrases mostly that I've just quoted, and I've underlined a whole lot more of the things that I enjoyed. So this is definitely a feat of achievement in just looking at the literary side of the book, not to mention, the tree hugging side, which is the side that we all love, and that's why one of the reasons why I picked it up myself. I'm a huge tree hugger. I was very interested to look up the biography of the author Richard Powers because I felt that for someone with this kind of literary skill and the all-encompassing vocabulary that had to go into this, he's a huge generalist, a very, very high functioning generalist. If he's I assume I was looking for his biography to look for a hint of a stint in, in forestry, in botany, in biology, in some sort of science or environmental field. But it's so, he is a very cool person because there's nothing, I don't see that in his official bio, and his official biography is something else altogether. So I need to link that for anyone who's interested to just sift through this person and his life. I think he was born in somewhere in the States, but he moved to Thailand when he was 11, and he got his formal education in the University of Illinois, enrolled in physics, and then he switched halfway to English literature. So like throughout the thing, you can see him trying not to specialize in anything, but he could have at any given moment almost. In the 1980s, he started working as a computer programmer, which is just like what the heck? And then all this time, he's reading about all sorts of fields, all sorts of books. Like I think he reads nonfiction he read nonfiction in the beginning, but somewhere in the middle, probably in the like the English lit phase of his life, he started combining the two. So this book reads, it's a very weird sense of a general book, but in a very, very detailed, nuanced way that combines the humanities with the sciences. So this book is like a bridge. There are very few books that are like this on subject matter that can be scientific or social or just very fluffy in the non-scientific way. So I could see why this has gotten the reviews that it has, because there's a lot of vocabulary that I learned in this book. Not that I don't know what these words meant, but the way that they are described, like it fuses the science part with, you don't need to be a scientist to understand what he's saying. So this book, one of the fictional characters that it mentions is actually Patricia Westerford. I think that is a completely fiction name, but when I was reading this part of the story, it really reminded me of Suzanne Simard, and she wrote the book Finding the Mother Tree, which I read last year, and it was one of the best nonfiction books that I read last year. And when I Googled it, I was right. He was talking about her research, her life exactly, paraphrased in this book, and layering that in. So it's so cool. I feel very proud at myself for having recognized that reference, but also I feel so like a lot of gratitude for him having put that in, because now it reaches a larger audience. How her research was received, especially in the beginning, by industry, by government, by regulators, and the amazingness of that research, that symbiotic relationship between certain species like Douglas fir and the birch, as well as how the root system acts like a highway for trees to trade, chemical sensors, sensory information about, threats and risks, and how trees support each other, and how to count carbon. Like Suzanne Simard's book is very scientific because she is that researcher. She's the one coming up with the hypothesis and trying to convince people and suffering the backlash. So all of that is it's still very factual, and it's very realistic. But combined in this book, it gives it a story, and people need stories. So if there is one book that I recommend for people to read about sustainability, about reforestation, about trees, it would be this book, because it calls for people, it brings awareness to current issues, but not in such a way that is detached from what people can understand, what they can take. Because so this book, it follows a couple of characters, and the first part is layering in all of these environmental activists, these radical environmental activists' own personal stories, and each of them relating to a certain specific type of tree. So the first part is really cool to read, the first 200 pages. And then it talks about their combined stories of when they are here, when they've heard their callings to become activists, and the things that they did as activists and suffered. That's the middle portion, the trunk. All in all, I would say that the idea of this book is really fantastic, but one really only needs to read half of it to fully enjoy. I don't mean that the second half is disposable or any sense, but it just doesn't offer as much. It does not progress the plot, I think. There is a little bit of plot, as in rounding off the stories of these people, but the denouement is really the middle of the book. The rest of it is people living with their decisions, people dealing with everyday life, the realistic, mundane things that life takes over, which is why he dedicates half the book to it, because half our lives is actually dealing with the everyday, and the true story, the things that we remember, the things that matter the most, might have only happened within that 1 year, 2 year, 5 year period decades ago, and we keep on living. Life goes on, and people move apart, people come back together, but none of that perhaps really matters as much as that 1 year, 5 year period that happened decades ago. So I think that's why there are some reviews saying that, the second half of the book is not the same as the first half. It's not because of that, I think, but it's also necessary, and it's more realistic this way. It's more reflective this way. It's more in step with actual life. I really recommend this book, the Overstory, especially the first half of the story. There are a couple of other titles that I think people would enjoy as well, or people who've enjoyed those would enjoy the Overstory. So these are How to Find the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard. That's a more scientific bent on plants and trees and conservation in general. Another good one is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. That's more of a social, cultural twist on the exact same themes of forestation and conservation. The things that Aboriginal people knew before science confirmed, that type of thing. And that story I read 2 years ago, also very enjoyable. And if one really wanted to, delve deep into humanity with a certain sci-fi twist, I would highly recommend Cloud Atlas, which is a little bit out there in terms of, it's not so much of conservation or even forestation, but it's more of talking about human greed, which is exactly how we ended up with, the need for stories like this. So that is everything that I wanted to talk about related to the Overstory. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this book or any other related tree hugger books that I might like as well. I would really like to hear from you. Thanks, and have a good week.